Welcome everyone. If we haven't met, my name is Will Stewart, and I'm the Executive Director of Stay, Work, Play New Hampshire, which is a statewide nonprofit whose mission is to attract and retain more young people here in the Granite State. And would like to thank everyone for joining us this morning for this, what I know is going to be a great webinar aimed at helping all of your organizations become and remain employers of choice, not employers to avoid. It's going to be a great presentation with a great presenter, followed by a live Q&A session. So be sure and use the comment section below to share any questions that you might have at any point during the presentation, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can following the presentation. Before we get started, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Trivantis, a workplace payroll provider, and I highly recommend them for any of your payroll needs. So thanks again to Trivantis. So with that, let's get started. Our presenter today is Pubali Chakravorty-Campbell, an accomplished entrepreneur and well-known HR professional here in New Hampshire. Pubali's passion is sharing her knowledge to help businesses grow and succeed. Leveraging her robust background and experience in business administration, executive coaching, and a professional designation as a senior certified HR professional, Pubali specializes in strategic human resources for business owners and leaders who want to align their business goals with those of their workforce and become employers of choice. Originally from Louisville, Kentucky, Pubali has been in New England since 1997. As a member of New Hampshire's rich entrepreneurial community, she has won numerous business awards, such as New Hampshire Business Review's Outstanding Women in Business, New Hampshire Magazine's Remarkable Women, and the New Hampshire Union Leaders 40 Under 40. In 2019, she was selected as one of the Granite State's most influential business leaders by New Hampshire Business Review. Please join me in welcoming Pubali Chakravorty-Campbell. Take it away.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, thank you. I think you should kind of travel everywhere with me, because now I feel like I have a really big head and I need a pin to pop it, because that was quite an introduction. Thank you. Everyone, hi. If I had the delight of working with all of you a couple of weeks ago on our interviewing presentation, thank you for coming back. I know I saw some familiar names, and I also know there's some friends of mine from the HR community on the seminar today or webinar today, and so I'm grateful that you're here and for the nice notes you shared. We're going to be talking about a subject that's really interesting, and it's kind of a topic du jour, right? We're talking, well, not du jour is the right, I think, the right thing to say here, which is being an employer of choice. You know, I love that right now what's happening is people are looking at things that have always mattered through a slightly different lens because of what's going on. What I told the group last time, and I'll say it again, is when I work, I try to have everything be as scalable as possible and usable, so that you learn something today that you might be able to do tomorrow. But most importantly, it should be, in my mind, something that is, above some sort of a weird thing that's happening in the moment. So it should be kind of like a neutral pair of pants or shoes that kind of goes with everything all the time. So yes, there's some unique things happening right now with being an employer, being an employee as well. But this is material really that transcends the virus, if you will, and is relative to just you today, no matter what. Thank you for that introduction, Will. I appreciate it. I look forward to this dialogue. And on that note, my presentations are a conversation. It's harder this way, but Will and Sarah have taken the responsibility of monitoring the chat. I want you guys to interrupt me to ask questions, because some of the best stuff in these types of seminars often happens in the immediate dialogue, not in the slides. So please feel free to interrupt. I'll do my best to stop a few times over the course of the next hour to answer your questions. So don't be shy or leave and wait until the end of Q&A if you would like, ask me right away. So I saw this picture when I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is a huge subject, right? Employers of choice. It is literally something that HR departments will spend days, weeks, months, years in refining and redefining and fixing and changing and updating. It doesn't happen quickly. And my goodness, trying to cover a subject like this in an hour on a webinar is going to be tricky. So I wanted to show this to you just to get into your heads The topic is huge. We're only going to be at the tip of this iceberg today. And so what I want to do is really stick with some high level concepts to get your head in the right direction and maybe give you some relief because you're wondering if you are, am I not, what do I need to do differently? But please understand this is a really heavy duty subject. And so obviously we can maybe have further discussions about how to really drill into specifics that are unique to you and your organization. Don't let that stop you from asking questions. Okay, in my career, well before I was formally in human resources, this concept of employer of choice, this concept of being a place people want to go work at was showing up a certain way, especially in this community, in this state. Well, this is really where I did the majority of my business. And it was all about perks, right? Free food, beer on tap, you know, amazing little perks, people doing, you know, great big outings, and you have video games in the office and all of these things. And as I was going out there as an entrepreneur, and I was a business owner, right? And I was kind of thinking about what I needed to do, I kept getting advice related to stuff like this. And it didn't make any sense to me because I was in the fitness industry. I can't have beer on tap, nor do I want the liability. And free food, I mean, I had a fitness studio. People would be puking if I was giving away free food all the time, right? So I wanted to think about this through the lens of all of you looking at this seminar with me today and going, things like this, while it is a very small piece, it is a piece of being an employer of choice depending on you and what you do. It's one tiny slice of this big, huge pie of being an employer of choice. Okay, so if you're doing stuff like this, that's cool, awesome. If you're not, I don't want you to start to think that, oh my God, I'm not an employer of choice, or let's call it EOC for today, because I don't offer that kind of stuff. So how do we look at it? So I wanted to make this as logical as possible. And those of you who are on this call today are on this call because you understand the dynamics of being an employer, whether you're the leader of the organization or you're in human resources at your organization. What do we need to think about this? How do we want to think about this? What came up for me was the employee life. How does the employee life cycle play into being an employer of choice? So today I'm really going to look at it through that lens and try to cover the very basics of that. So when we are hiring, when we are opening our doors to the public to come and work for us, we have a system that we have to follow. Depending on what you Google, and if you type in employee life cycle, some systems are going to give you only maybe 3 or 4 processes within the system or the cycle. Some are going to give you more. SHRM, if you are one of my fellow HR professionals, you know that SHRM has it in 4 categories. But to me, it's a thing of 6, right? It's 6 steps. Starts with recruiting. How are we getting on the radar of people that are looking for jobs? Next is hiring. If you're looking at the screen on your right, okay, now you got on their radar, you started the dialogue with them. How do we actually hire them? That whole process. And then orienting them. Okay, so you got on their radar, you went through this whole process to bring them into the fold, and they agreed to join the family. Now they're here, now we have to get them adjusted and involved and integrated. Great. Then we have to take care of people, right? We don't want to just bring them in and then leave them out. We need to make sure we support them, that they have what they need. And of course, that's not enough either, because we need to develop them. We want them to be engaged. We want our workforce to want to come to work, not have to come to work. That was one of the things I strived for when I was the business owner. And in my leadership experiences, I wanted my team to want to come to work every day. I didn't want them to be there because it was an means to an end. And so we have to develop them. And then lastly, and this is a normal part of the employee life cycle, we have to exit people. We hope we don't have to exit people. We love it when we don't have to exit people. We love having long tenured employees. But the reality is that people do leave, either on their own accord, or sometimes we have to ask them to leave. And it's not easy. It's not a happy occasion. But how we handle that is just as important as how we got on their radar to begin with. All right. So when we discuss this today, you're going to see I'm going to stick to these 6 topics. We'll talk about each of those high levels. All right. So let's begin. recruiting. Recruiting is really interesting. And I think if you recall from my last conversation with this group, you know, I am in the process right now of a professional pivot myself. And so this is real to me. I'm in the midst of this right now where I am trying to get on people's radars. People are trying to get on my radar. And I'm going through this recruitment process. Employers of choice do not wait until people are in their buildings to start treating them well. And these are some areas on your left where I have seen professionally for many years where companies begin to fail as employers of choice. They often do not have a career website, a career page on their website. They may not have a great website at all. Now, I know great is subjective, but I think you know what I mean in terms of we all have websites we go to where we're like, ooh, what does our own website look like? You know, I remember when I had my own business, it was one of the first investments I made because it's now in today's market even more important than our actual brick and mortar, right? If we even have one. So great recruiting is a marker of an employer of choice. Great websites, great career pages, and this is where a lot of people don't realize there's room for improvement with their organizations, is what are people saying about them? In my consultancy, when clients would have this dialogue with me and say, look, this is what I want to achieve, one of the very first things I would do is I would Google them and I would look to see what are people saying. Now, if you're sitting there going, seriously, Pubali, what are people saying? Yes, unfortunately, what happens is websites like Glassdoor, websites like LinkedIn, I know there's a lot of junk out there. I had a business, I get it, but we also have the opportunity as employers to respond. And I don't think it's a question of whether or not people say nasty things, because they will and you can't control that, but it falls into the category of what are you able to control. And I cannot recommend enough how important it is that you research what the market is saying about you, right, wrong, or otherwise. Don't react and start to re-engage, because there are people that are looking to see if you're responding. At the end of the day, it's all a mystery till you're in the organization. But you as an employer of choice now, or as an organization that wants to be an employer of choice, needs to start thinking about what we call the employee value proposition. What are people saying about us? So let's talk about job descriptions on Indeed, LinkedIn Careers, whatever source you're using on your own website. This is another area where a lot of organizations tend to get a little bit lazy, right? The job descriptions are either too long, they're too short, they're not really emanating an energy. They're not talking about the culture of the organization. They're very, very draconian. They're very serious. I've seen job descriptions for companies, as I do my own search, where I can't believe what I'm seeing. And not because I'm HR, not because I'm, judgy, but because they're just kind of like, it's almost like they're yelling at me in the job description. You have to do this. You must do this. If you don't do this, you will not be considered. Look, there's going to be time in your hiring process to talk about the job specifications. In your job descriptions, it's really important to send the message that here's what we do, here's what works for us. How can we talk about it? So look at your job descriptions, see what they look like. Now, I can't even believe that today we are talking about in your recruiting process that someone like me and you were sitting here talking about being nice, being responsive, being honest, and being kind. People don't do it. And I think some of you have personally experienced it in your own searches, that oftentimes you will hear nothing. If you get anything back, it's an automatic response that says, thank you, but no thank you. If you do get a live person, questions are often not answered over email. People aren't willing to talk to you on the phone. I understand the dilemma as the organizations get bigger. People that are in human resources don't have the bandwidth to speak personally and really hand massage every single potential candidate. But the bottom line is employers of choice have thought about that experience that people are having and remembering that whatever they walk away with might actually stick forever. And we're going to talk about this later, but that person may come back again someday, and they may actually be your superior, or they may be a customer, or they may be an M&A, a merger acquisition. You don't know. So I think it's really important in the recruiting component of the hiring process to think about how are we treating these people, and is there an opportunity for us to do it better that aligns with the size of our organization and our culture and our image. Every interaction matters. And lastly, I think some of you might be going, yes, 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 this is so true. This whole concept of when you meet someone that you like, even if you don't have an opportunity for them, keeping them warm, staying in touch, even if it's once or twice a year, once or twice a week, whatever that's appropriate, and saying, here's the status update, here's the status update. Long gaps tell the candidate a lot of things that may or may not be true about you and your organization. And I'm personally experiencing that. And I know this is going to be a little strict, and I invite you to disagree with me. In spite of the virus, ignoring people is not acceptable, okay? The one point in saying things are crazy right now, we're gonna not be able to talk for a while, is better than just letting them go, because you don't know what your needs are gonna be. So high level, thinking about the recruiting process, looking for opportunities to make it better. All right, so now we're moving into hiring well. I'm only gonna look down on occasion to look for my, look at the time, so I'm on time. So hiring well, okay, now they're here. You've invited them to interview. What is that experience like? What are they a part of? Are they a part of a chaotic, I don't know, what do you think system within your organization that they're now going to witness because it's disorganized? Or are they going to be a part of a very organized system? Even if behind the scenes there's some churn, what is that candidate experience going to be like? This part is also here for a reason. Employers of choice are very specific about that experience that people have. To start, an organized process, knowing who's going to do what, involving the right people, right? If you know there's people on your in your organization that could use some training, then I think it's really important to remember that let's train them first and then open the job if we can. Or as it's happening, say, look, there's some basic things we need to make sure you, internal hiring manager or interviewer, that you do. So make sure you have the right people, make sure that you're training them, and make sure that no matter how someone is, know how much experience you've had being the interviewer. It's important to learn the art of interviewing. There is an art to it, right? And I think most of you will agree, because you're working, right? You've experienced being interviewed. Nothing brings out weird power issues in people than this whole dynamic of hiring. You know, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, things happen during this process. How that shows up can affect the candidate experience. In turn, it can affect your value in your brand. So again, it's a small world. You don't know the relationship unless you specifically ask. You don't know how this person might show up again. So be nice, be honest, be responsive, and stopping the insanity of interrogating and being aggressive in the interview process. Now, I'm picking on just that. There's a lot of people doing this stuff super, super, super well, and you're probably involved because you're here, because you care. But I think this is about how do we become or maintain EOC status. We have to pay attention to hiring and the process that people are going through. You know, I was thinking the other day, before we head on to the next slide, wouldn't it be cool if there was a place for candidates, even the ones that are rejected, to go and offer, you know, to solicit them for feedback about their experience? I know it's probably something that would require a lot of thought. How do you do that? How do you take that feedback seriously? But I've had experiences already this year where you know, wow, if the company knew people were acting that way, I think it would really affect the way that they handle their hiring. So think about how you're doing the hiring process. I'm going to stop here for a second just to make sure there aren't any questions. Will, I'm not looking at all of the other flashing lights and stuff. So is there anything here that people want to talk about so far?
We haven't seen anything come in on the chat yet, but would certainly encourage everyone, if you have any questions at any time, just pop them in there for sure.
Yeah, especially if you don't agree. You know, I welcome that, because you know what? I don't know it all. And I'm coming from, you know, the angle of trying to think about the big picture. So please don't feel weird about coming in and giving me your 2 cents. But so far we've talked about recruiting well, that whole process, hiring well, that whole process. Okay, what's after that? So let's talk about the lucky, lucky, lucky candidates that you offer a job to. My goodness, that is awesome. They are over the moon. You are over the moon. They pick their first date. You agree to that date. Now what happens, right? So the first thing I'm going to tell you is orientation and onboarding are two different things. Orientation or onboarding are mutually exclusive. This is a really important fact for me to share. Why am I saying that? General best practices are that orientations are short-term, 1-2 week, when people are just getting the lay of the land, really getting the technical aspects of their new employment, the computers, where's the bathroom, where do I go for lunch? Onboarding is the integration into the organization. So one employer of choice best practice is to have definition between the two and make sure that people aren't oriented and then expected to integrate within their new organization in a very short amount of time. So employers of choice are going to do certain behaviors, exercise certain behaviors around the orientation / onboarding process. So we're not going to talk about onboarding in this presentation. I'm really going to kind of demonstrate here what the differences are. First of all, and onboarding actually is, I believe, next week. So orientation, first of all, buddies. Think about the buddy system. You know, I come to work for you. I'm so excited. You are probably the hiring manager, or you're in a position where you can't take 2 weeks off just to hang out with me. Although I bet you'd want to, because I'd want to hang out with you. So you may have to assign someone to me that serves as my buddy. For a couple of weeks, 1 to 2 weeks, that person is my resource, whether it's you or someone else, to make sure that I am comfortable and I'm figuring my stuff out, that I'm not accidentally walking into a conference room, not knowing how to book it, and there's all the executives sitting there, and boy, do I look like a jerk, right? Making sure their equipment is ready when they start, that their business cards are already there. Some companies go as far as to have little cute swag boxes. That's great. You know, maybe you don't have the budget for that. A swag box does not equal in a vacuum an employer of choice, okay? But having these things taken care of is a part of the orientation process. It's an organized process. You know, on Monday, we're going to do this. On Tuesday, we're going to do this. I know some of your organizations already do these seminars, right? HR puts on 2 or 3 day orientations. That's awesome, because it gives people a chance to kind of get into the flow of their new lives with you. No surprises for anyone. What do I mean by that? I have heard about companies where a new employee has walked into someone's office and introduced, and that person sitting in that office has no idea that person was even hired, or what job they're doing, or why, or who their hiring manager is. That does not look good for anyone. It puts the new employee in an awkward position. It puts whoever that is in an awkward position. So I think it's really important that everyone is told in some medium that works for the size and culture of your organization that so-and-so has joined the company. So that as you walk them around and say, this is Wally, this is Wally, this is Wally, everyone's like, hey, welcome, not, oh, hey, you know, because again, employer of choice is about being better, right? Being of choice. So no surprises for anyone, especially the new hire, around anything. It really needs to be as tightly packaged as possible. This is something that is unique to me. This may not be realistic for you, but I like to see new employees have some things to do out of the gate. When you are a new employee, think about human behavior. There's some uncertainty, there's some anxiety, there's nerves, there's excitement, and you want to do right by your new employer. So when you start and you've got a whole week or two stretched out in front of you of orienting, it's nice to say, you know what, how about getting a couple of these things done in 2 weeks? It doesn't have to be hard. I'm not talking about complicated things that require knowledge that they haven't acquired yet, but it gives them something to do so they feel like they're producing. This concept of not producing is one of the single greatest impacts to morale, right? When you feel like you're not doing anything. So I like to recommend to the clients that I work with in my time that have a couple things ready for them that you need them to produce. Nothing too crazy, so that they feel like they're integrated, that they're beginning to do some work. And we're going to talk about this more next week in onboarding if you're going to join me. Don't overwhelm people. This is kind of the opposite of that. Don't have a stack of things on their desks and get this done in 2 weeks. You know, maybe you select 2 or 3 people a day to meet with. I don't know. But orientation is about welcoming them to your home, introducing them. Here's the bathroom, right? Here's where the fridge is, versus, just get everybody integrated, get them productive. Because that's the extreme, that's another extreme. Okay, check in often. That's common sense. How are you? What do you need? Your buddy, that point person, is probably going to be the one to do that. And then lastly, why did I cross this out? So this one is kind of funny, and it's also kind of sad. You most likely have a handbook, right? And that handbook may be big, it may be small, I don't know. And you may have a separate document like, I don't know, I think my light just went off. So hopefully if it went dark, it's because I lost my little glam light here. The concept of having somebody ask you a question and then just saying it's in the handbook. The reason I put this in this list is because I've seen this happen, and employers of choice will direct people to the handbook after there's evidence to suggest that they're integrated, but in the first few days, someone needs to help people out. So please, please don't just send a link to the handbook and say it's in the handbook. And too many organizations of all sizes are doing this, and it does not look good in terms of being an employer of choice. Okay, so this is kind of a weird detail, but one I wanted to cover. Okay, I'm going to do this slide and then I'm going to hit the pause again in case anybody has any questions or reactions. So now we're moving into their here. You've now oriented them, you've onboarded them. The support, right? Here's the chicken sitting on the egg. The support really needs to start, right? It's starting already in the beginning, before they even start with you. But I think it's important over the course of this first few steps, what are we doing to take care of our people? This happens to be where a lot of people think being an employer of choice starts. They think it happens here. What they're losing sight of is it actually started even before the employee joined your company, when you were trying to get on their radar, right? When we support our people, we're paying them appropriately at market or above, or in a way that's, fair compensation. We're offering benefits that are satisfying the needs of our workforce. We're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second, but the benefits match the needs, what you can afford. They're good benefits. Or if you can't afford benefits, my first company, I was too small. I couldn't pay for healthcare. You talk about the things you can't do transparently, and you talk about how you can make their experience better. If there's things they need that you can't quite give them yet, whether that's early on in the discussion or once they're integrated into the organization. So their benefits are taken care of, you're taking care of their compensation, and there's engagement activities. You're not leaving them on an island in their desk just hoping that they figure stuff out. Into different activities, letting them witness meetings, maybe having them be a part of stuff that is, they're not going to hands-on be involved, but they're going to be on the fringe, kind of taking it all in, learning the culture. You listen, right? One of the biggest things, I saw a lot of big things. Obviously, you can imagine most of my friends in HR agree, we see big things all the time. But a common issue is that a lot of employers are worried about asking their workforce questions because they're thinking ahead and worrying about what their response is going to be. They're going to ask me for more. They're going to tell me what I'm not doing. And so from a place of fear and self-defense, a lot of employers don't ask their workforce or new hires questions about what they need or want. An employer of choice does not do that. An employer of choice doesn't come into something going, I won't be able to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm not even going to ask. They come in and they say, what can I do better or differently? They receive the information and they have a dialogue about why it can happen, why it can't happen, how long it might take to happen. It's that transparency that's so important. And it's harder for some than others, I get it, but that is something that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about. Perks unique to your culture, people, and bottom line. Why did I put this here? I used to work with companies that were worried about the cost of having beer on tap. They were worried about the cost of having gourmet coffee and free snacks. And I would ask them, why are we talking about this? And they would say, well, because that's what all the companies nowadays are doing. Look, all the companies nowadays are not doing that. If you're going to go into debt to provide free beer and snacks to your workforce because that's what you think they want, I'm telling you right now, you have to knock that off. And a lot of companies are worried and they're adding expense and burdens unnecessarily. If you're asking your workforce what you need, what they need and want, some may say this, some may say, I want time to do charity work. I want this, I want that. Please don't add bottom line expenses to your overhead or add overhead, because that's what people in Silicon Valley are doing. That's what some of the tech companies are doing. If you're not in tech, it's not an apples to apples comparison, okay? So please, please, please keep that in mind. The next piece, and it makes me really upset, where companies do things for their workforce because it's something they can use to hold over their head. I'm giving you this Cadillac health benefit system, health benefits plan. You need to perform for me in exchange. Employers of choice do the right thing, what's best for them and their workforce, because it's the right thing to do, not because it's a way to coerce or manipulate their workforce. Please, please remember that. You have to think about how you're presenting these benefits to your workforce. If you're doing great things, it's because you want them to be happy and you want to feel good about it, but not so that you can hold it over their head. And I've seen a lot of employers do this, which is why I put this on this slide. Effective leadership. We haven't even scratched the surface of management training on this seminar, right? Supporting people well means making sure their management are getting trained. They're effective leaders. You can have the best benefits in the world, but if you have crappy managers, you're not going to be an employer of choice, because those crappy managers are going to drive the great workforce away from your organization, okay? So think about more than just stuff. Think about behaviors and intangible things to make yourself an employer of choice that supports their employees well. Lastly, I'm doing time check, but is this whole thing about complaining about millennials. I'm sure you've heard it. I know I've heard it, right? People in leadership complaining about certain things like flexible schedules, like perks related to giving time off for charity work, other things that may or may not make sense to a leadership person, because at that point in their career, that's not what they need or want. And so the message is, oh, the millennials are this, the millennials are that. And anytime someone says anything to me, naming a particular segment of the human population as a reason that something's annoying or not working or eye roll, here's what I always say to them. There was a point in time when company leadership would say, I have to do all of these things because now there's women in the workforce. There was a point in time when employers used to say things because, oh, I have to do all of these things because there's African Americans in the workforce, or there's people that don't speak English as a first language in our workforce. Folks, that's discrimination, right? Whether it's real discrimination that the Employment Opportunity Council is going to get involved with, or it's just meanness. Complaining about doing something because a certain segment of the population is asking for it does not make you an employer of choice. What it does is listening to that segment of the population and thinking about how you can make it work and being transparent if you can, right? So supporting people is how employers of choice are employers of choice. All right, I'm going to hit the pause. How is everybody doing? Please let Will know if you're throwing tomatoes at me virtually. If there's anything I can do better or differently so far, if I'm too fast, too slow, et cetera, et cetera.
No tomatoes, no tomatoes yet. Getting some great positive comments. So
okay. I can have a basket of tomatoes, and I can just, if somebody throws one, I can be like, all right, and then I can just do it, and everybody will have a laugh. Okay, good. Then I'll keep going. All right. We're moving through the cycle, right? Now we're talking about development. Supporting your workforce and develop them are different, two different things. First of all, right out of the gate, learning organizations are an indicator of organizations that care and develop their workforce. And what is a learning organization? A learning organization is one that puts everyone in the company at every rank, at every level, and says, we want to learn as a group. I want to learn as an individual. So what are you introducing to them? Is it only subject matter expert that's going to make them better at their job? Or is it that plus professional development that's going to make them a better citizen of your company? And is it also thinking about things that may have nothing to do with the work you do, the service or goods you sell, but it has to do with just generally being a great member of the community and providing a great service and good, and just being a happy place to work. You know, some companies do cooking classes, some companies do leadership programs. Every organization defines this differently. But a learning organization is a very strong indicator of being an employer of choice. I'm not telling you that you now have to go and fund everybody's, you know, going to SNHU or UNH or whatever. It's about providing educational and learning opportunities. And also it's about providing them, but not, you know, saying, okay, the executives don't have to do it. Everybody should be learning. So developing people is really, really important. Andrew Goji, what is that's adult learning? It's a 5-cent word for this presentation. But why is it important? Adult learning and child learning pedagogy are different. Okay, when you are teaching adults, these are not my numbers. This is the science. They suggest, it's proven, it's called the 70-20-10 rule that adds up to 100. Right? Adult learners, 70% of the learning happens experientially, hands-on, doing it, right? So putting your workforce through hours and hours of just this, what I'm doing to you guys, is that 20 or that 10%. Really, it's that 10% of their learning, okay? But it's that you want them to learn something, let them do it along with you. Job expansion, job sharing, whatever system you want to come up with. But it's about giving them the opportunity to try things out. And then the 20% is learning through, you know, listening, seminars, you know, going to classes, things like that. And the 10% is just hearing about stuff. So you look it up, do the research, but developing people, it's not just about throwing them opportunities to learn. It's about making sure the learning is going to stick. There's a whole thing that goes into this about organizational effectiveness and design, which is what is my background in how to best develop your workforce. It's not necessarily the super easiest thing to do, right? It involves a little bit of work and training. Okay, moving into mentoring and coaching. First of all, as an executive coach, I like to make sure I tell people my opinion that being a mentor and being a coach are two different things. There's a lot of similarities, but you know, if you're just a Venn diagram, there's a lot here, but there's two different objectives, right? Coaching is more goals driven, more objective driven, outcomes driven, and mentoring tends to be more of a general touch point, growing, learning. You know, here's an individual I honor and I really look up to, learning from them. There's pros and cons that come with both. Great employers offer both. And it has two different sets of outcomes with some common denominators. So great thing to think about is, how can I mentor my workforce? How can I coach my workforce? Some will need both, some will need one. I don't know anybody who doesn't need either, to be honest with you, at any level. And of course, development includes diversity, equity, inclusivity. I think most of you will agree that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusivity, is an entire half-day workshop on its own. However, for the purposes of this discussion, organizations that have diversity in their workforce, both physical diversity, emotional diversity, diversity of thought, tend to perform better. They are considered employers of choice. So when we think about developing, we think about developing a workforce that looks and feels diverse. So I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot there to unpack, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. Time check, we're looking good. Career development, planning, and management. Why did I put them together? The concept of career development, consider it the umbrella. And within career development, all my HR friends are probably like, oh yeah, this is something we're trained on, right? Career planning is what the employee is held responsible for. Career management is what the employer is responsible for. It's a partnership. This is where a lot of employers miss the boat, because they either, out of fear or not knowing, take on 100% of the burden of developing their workforce, or they put 100% of the burden on the employee. There's risks, more risks than benefit to that. I like to see employers have an integrated approach where both parties have skin in the game, right? It is business after all, and both parties have something to gain, both parties have something to lose if development isn't done well or at all. So EOCs have some thought that they put into this. And lastly, continuous performance improvement. You will notice, and it's not an accident, that I didn't say performance management. I will be very candid with you. I have some pretty provocative views in performance management. I'm not a fan of the annual review. I know that a lot of companies need to do that, and you have to have a performance project from a performance process from the legal side for making sure that there's documentation. I get all that. Great employers have baked performance management into being an employee. It's casual sometimes, it's formal other times. It's constantly happening. It's a drip versus a fire hydrant. In my experience, and you may disagree, and that's perfectly understandable, companies that are of choice make performance something that is a normal, everyday routine thing that's talked about versus the once a year explosion that's tied to compensatory increases, because then it becomes a little bit of a, it can be rather a little bit of a, you know, that quid pro quo. You do well, I give you some money. That's not the Pavlovian response we want to have our workforce have. Okay, so thinking about it through the lens not of just money and, you know, compliance, but thinking about it through the lens of we do better as employers when we're constantly helping one another grow. Goes right back to the first bullet. We're a learning organization. It's just a best practice. So sharing this with you. Okay, the last bullet, sixth bullet, is the exit. Now, it's sad and it's sometimes very traumatic, but it happens, right? Our goal is obviously to do what we can within our span of control to limit that, right? If we do all the other things well, we may save people from leaving. That is what employers of choice do. They do stuff so that we don't have to worry as much about this, but this is going to happen. It's inevitable. Promotions happen, transfers happen. You may have multiple locations. They may move out to another location. You may be overseas, you know, send somebody to another country. Terminations happen. Things don't work out sometimes and we have to let people go. Resignations happen. You know, I did that in January. People pivot. They want to go do something else. They're gonna say goodbye. Retirements happen, leaves of absence, family leave, maternity leave, paternity leave. How we handle these leaves and these exits play into our status of being an employer of choice. And so a lot of times what companies do is they're super about everything unless you go, if you need to go. And then all of a sudden gone is the amazing employer, and out comes this, like, who is this person? Who is this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde? So we want to make sure that we're consistent through the whole cycle and that we are good to the very end. How do you do that? Remember that tip of the iceberg? There's a lot that goes into it, right? There's the compliance and legal aspect of it. There's process. There's what their first 5 steps were like. But I'm just here to tell you to get your juices flowing. Think about what you're doing in this area and start to get a discussion going within your organization, big or small, about how you're handling it. Why is it important? They're not here today. They may come back tomorrow. They may want to come back and re-employ with you. They may come back as a customer. They may come back, who knows, they may come back one day to buy your company, right? And so we want to always think about applying the same philosophies and best practices that we do to make sure we keep our customers happy, that we do to keep our workforce happy. If a customer leaves most of the time, are you going to burn the bridge? The answer is no, most likely not. Why? Because you don't know when they're going to come back, and sometimes we want them to come back. So please think about it through the same lens when it comes to your workforce. Don't burn bridges. I also put compliance here. There's a lot that goes into compliance. I'm not going to go into that and make everybody's eyes roll back in their head, but the bottom line is how we exit people is going to play into potentially whether or not we're going to have problems down the range, okay? So there's things like documentation, making sure we are following all of the labor laws and employment law, that we are being fair, that we're not doing anything under the board. So thinking about how we exit is very, very important. Okay, I have a couple more slides. I'm doing good on time, so we're just about at the end. I'm going to hit the pause. Any questions, anything glaring before I begin to wrap it up? Are you guys okay?
Everything looks good.
Everything looks good. All right. Perfect. Let me know if anything changes.
I have one quick question around orientation. About,
Mohammed, I am having a little trouble hearing you, my friend. It's very muffled.
oh, so sorry about that. One moment.
That's okay. That's okay.
Can you hear me now?
I can. I'm going to do my best. Yes, fire away.
Oh, yes. So I was hoping to ask about the buddy system. If you, once you have somebody paired together, what kind of training should you provide to a buddy to make sure they're helping the candidate orient to the company well? And how can you kind of ensure that they're adjusting to the culture in the most way possible?
Okay, that's an excellent question, Mohammed. And here's what I'm going to tell you, just because in the interest of time, it's a whole conversation in of itself. But high level, to have a buddy is to think about having employees within your organization that you trust and that you know are going to be able to demonstrate the best definition of correct and good citizenship, right? So you want to think about having people that are great communicators, that are honest people, transparent people. It's not to say that everybody in your company that isn't like this isn't good, but there's some people that are people, and there's some people that are not people. It's not a right or a wrong, it's just a difference in work personalities. So if you want to demonstrate an example of great, then you want to pick people or train people within your organization that are going to begin to do that. And then, of course, the most important part is to integrate them within the orientation process, right? So they may or may not be an HR professional. We have to think about what their schedules are like. Can they tolerate having the buddy? So logistically, how are they going to handle it? And what types of tools and resources do you want them to have? And what types of tools and resources do they need from you so that they can, do their job well? An employee handbook is an amazing, amazing tool to use as almost like a script to help to cultivate a dialogue about what do we want to talk about here? What do we want to talk about here? Now, here's my disclaimer, and my fellow HR people are probably hoping I'm going to say this. There are certain things that you don't want buddies to be responsible for. Things that fall into the category of compliance, right? Labor law, things that have to do with, making decisions that could affect their perception of, whether or not this organization is discriminatory or not. You want to be very, very careful that the buddy is given boundaries into which he or she says, I can answer questions here, but if you need questions about benefits, about how to get a promotion, about this and that, and it's not anecdotal, it's real information, now I'm going to have to pass you off to the hiring manager or to someone in HR, because you do not want to introduce liabilities to this organization or to the buddy because they speak out of school. There's a lot of training involved, and again, it depends on what you're doing. So maybe this is a great topic for another seminar, but Mohammed, this is I would say the first things that come up for me. Okay.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So with that, I'm going to keep trucking because I know it's really hard when you're standing between someone and lunch. So I'm going to keep moving here. I had this slide here about more stuff. And what I mean by more stuff is, the tip of the iceberg. We know we just scratched the surface, but here's other things to keep in mind. Zero tolerance policies are an indicator of an employer of choice. They do not tolerate instances of discrimination. They do not tolerate instances of meanness, bad behavior by leadership. They manage bad managers or ineffective managers up. In some cases, they manage them out. They care about their press. They care about their reputations in the community. They care about whether or not they're diverse and equitable, if they're inclusive, right? Do all of the people in the mailroom look one way, but all the people in the executive suite look another? Employers of choice are thinking about these visual cues because optics matter, right? So there's a lot of this extra stuff that I think it's important to talk about. Looking at your HR professionals that work in your companies as more than the people that are doing compliance, benefits, payroll, and recruiting. A marker of an employer of choice, and I know I'm biased because I'm a strategist in HR. I'm not a transactional HR professional. Trust me, you don't want me doing that stuff for you. But as a strategist, when I go into companies that see value in all of what HR professionals can bring to the table, that is an indicator of an employer of choice, because they're looking at people like me as more than just someone that hits process payroll and makes sure that the posters are up. Okay, so HR professionals are capable of a lot. Use them as a resource, and they have access to resources to help you be an employer of choice. Start as small or as big as you want, but make sure you start. And if you're already there, make sure you maintain. Virus, no virus, tragedies, no tragedies, employers of choice keep wanting to stay here or do it to begin with, and asking those people that work for you. Companies that make their decisions in the boardroom in a vacuum, thinking they know everything, do not succeed as employers of choice, because you don't. You don't know what your people are going through. If I had more time, I would tell about the story of the guy in the insurance company in Boston who had a beautiful article written about him because he gives his people flexible work schedule. How he got to that conclusion made my hair curl. And if you heard the story, it would make your hair curl. If you want to hang out for Q&A after, I'll tell you about it, because it's worthwhile to hear it. And then remember that the pursuit of being an employer of choice is constant. You don't just check the boxes and close the book and move on. You have to keep evolving, innovating, talking, fixing, correcting, and maintaining. That's just like anything else. Your company is the same way. So what did I tell you? Right? Did I not tell you that here's the tip of the iceberg and then here's the subject? You're seeing how complex it is. So the final message I have for you, if you're going to take one thing away, if you're sitting at your desk right now feeling like, oh my goodness, what do I do? Sweating. You being an employer of choice must mirror your organization and its resources. I was a small business owner. I had a company for a very long time in Manchester. I've been in the entrepreneurial ecosystem my whole career, either as the owner of the company or serving entrepreneurs. I've been in this bubble. I know what it's like. And I'm telling you that when we try to copy a company whose resources and abilities look different than ours, we are introducing risk to ourselves. If you can't afford a Cadillac benefits plan, thinking that just doing it because that's what everybody else is doing, I know I'm a broken record, is going to cause problems, right? So do the best you can with what you've got. The secret sauce, in my opinion, is putting it out there that that's where you're trying to go, or that's what you're trying to do. And that makes it more authentic, and that transparency makes it be less, makes there less friction between you and your workforce. So I told you it was a big topic, okay? So I'm gonna end here. I'm gonna hang out for Q&A. If anybody wants to hang out a little bit longer with me, I'm here. Thank you so much for your time. This is my contact information. If you have any questions, let me know. Oh my gosh, Will, is that the little puppy?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I was so hoping that was gonna happen.
I think I need to take him outside and let him do his thing in here. Just I will step away for just a second, but we do have a couple of questions that have come in. Perhaps we can, I'll step out here for a second, but the first one, if Beth Soderberg wants to ask her question, followed by Alyssa McMurtry as well.
Yes, go, fire away.
Okay, so I was wondering, you were talking about, I was wondering if you could give some examples of baking the continuous performance improvement into the day-to-day, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
Than doing it all at once and being connected to their, pay and things like that.
Yeah. So one of the things that was really influential for me was this concept of how all of us in our work, we have certain job knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. They're called KSAOs. I did not make this up. This is a kind of an academic HR thing, but KSAOs speak to, again, knowledge, skills, abilities, other characteristics. Speaks to my job. I work for you, Beth, and I have certain knowledge I have to have, skills I have to have, abilities I need to have, and then a bunch of other stuff I need to have to be a great citizen of Sunrise Labs, right? And so when I think about continuous performance improvement, I think about knowing what that looks like and then visiting it with a great degree of regularity and sitting down, you and I talking about and going, how am I doing in this area? Is there room for improvement? How am I doing in this area? Is there room for improvement? Am I nailing some things and totally missing the boat on others? So that when the time to really make major improvements comes, the person isn't trying to catch up on 12 months of not having that. So my recommendation for you, Beth, is looking up, I'm happy to have a conversation with you about this, but understanding the, what K, S, A, and O's look like. The beauty of the O, the other characteristics, is that's where you get to really talk about what is important to be a good citizen of your company. And that is the basis, not just for performance management on a regular basis, recurring, but also how do you fill gaps? How do you do strategic hires, right? If you have a lot of people that are, a little bit low in certain areas, maybe your next hire, you hire someone that's really high in those areas, right? Because now you're beginning to kind of fill the puzzle pieces in. So a lot to unpack there as well, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a, starting point.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you got it. Alyssa, how can I help you?
Yes, I was just wondering if you could give some examples of how to kind of coach the managers through this process, because obviously as HR professionals, we're pretty savvy with the employee life cycle, but I think of, everything from that orienting to even exiting or transferring or promoting out of your department, managers aren't supportive of that. What's maybe some quick tips and tricks to be supportive, to help support those managers?
Sure. So the first thing that comes up for me when I hear your question is the importance of connecting the company's overall performance to the concept of how they are serving as a catalyst for that performance. So one of the things, and you and I know this because of the work that we do, but one of the things that speaks volume is numbers, right? Numbers matter more to some people than others. And so when we coach managers to come explicitly from a behavioral standpoint, to almost try to convince managers why it's important, I think it's important to also show how doing X, Y, and Z is going to affect their business unit's performance or the performance of the organization, and give examples of, here are examples of companies that didn't take these types of, proactive measures, and here's what happened to them. So kind of success stories and failure stories. And so to get them in the coaching world, we talk about resonance, right? We try to build resonance with people so that they're beginning to understand and buy in to the importance of pursuing certain things. It's upfront, more work, right? For those of you that are listening, going, how do I do that? Again, it's not something that's easy to cover in 2 minutes, but it's something where you need to look at why you're doing it. Instead of focusing on what to do and how to do it, managers need to first hear from their stakeholders why. And that why is often how you get the buy-in and you build the resonance, and then you have more attention and willingness to participate in the activities after that. So that's immediately what comes up for me. Hopefully that helps you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. Well, I believe that is about all we have for questions today. So I know Yasmin has said she'd love to hear the story about the flexible hours individual. So maybe if we want to hang out for a couple of seconds, we can
okay.
We can let you share that. As you mentioned, I know that we're pushing up on the lunch hour, and people are don't want to have people getting too antsy for lunch. So.
Yeah, so here's the story, and at some point they're going to figure out that I use the story as what not to do, and I'm probably going to get a letter from this guy. But I don't want to be too harsh, because learning better late than never. But the story is, and it's in Boston, and it's a very large insurance company, and the executive of this company is given all of this applaud and pomp and circumstance for the fact that he has had this aha moment, this moment of awakening, because he, at a very chronologically later in his life age, had to become the primary caregiver of his parents, who were very sick, and his mother either passed away or was completely unable to take care of his father. And so he now becomes the caregiver of his father. And in doing this constant caregiving, that any one of you that have, like I do, a parent that you help and take care of, you can't just do it before 9 and after 5, right? So he has this aha moment that, wow, if I'm having such a hard time, my workforce must be having a really hard time. I'm being sarcastic because why did it take the 66-year-old man that long to figure out that taking care of people is not easy to do between the hours of 9 to 5? And so, yes, they eventually got there at the end. But the story is, you don't want to have that reactive approach to being an employer of choice. That's why that story resonated with me as an example of what not to do, is if he had talked to his workforce about what makes their day hard, what are their challenges, he would have come to this conclusion years before, not because he suddenly became the caregiver of his dad and he, who probably has plenty of time and money, is in more flexibility. So that's the story, yes. I mean, that is these reactive aha moments that so many executives have, so people pat them on the back and they're like, let's have a ticker tape parade for this person, are coming to the party too late because they didn't ask the right questions to their workforce. So that's my big pedestal moment. I'll get off of it now, but that's the story.
Well, I think that's even more true now with everything that's going on in the world, you know, to ask what makes your day hard. You know, how are you struggling working remotely? How are you struggling being involved in the office in the day-to-day? And, you know, people don't want to have to sacrifice their careers. You know, they still want a career. They still want to feel like they're bringing value outside of the home.
Right.
So.
And how do you have a dialogue, a civil dialogue about where you can meet in the middle? Because, you know, employers can't just flex all the time and employees can't flex all the time. So it's a dialogue, right? And that's not easy to do because it requires some approaches to communication that are harder for some people than others, and riskier as well. Oh, yes, I mean, yes, I will. I hope that as long as I don't use any names, I should be fine. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, awesome. Pubali, thank you so much. You know, this was great, you know, as usual. And, you know, the pandemic notwithstanding, striving to be an employer of choice is certainly something that should always be at the top of mind for all of us, because, you know, if we don't have the right employees, none of us can do what we do. So thank you to you, Pubali, for sharing your experience and wisdom and good stories with us today. Thanks for everyone who's here today for taking the time to join us and to learn, to ask questions. Speaking of employers of choice, just want to give a very brief shout out to a few members of the Stay Work Play Board of Advisors who are joining us here today. We have Giselle Rodriguez from Northeast Delta Dental, Amy Rankins from Franklin Savings Bank, Lynn Cuomo from Core Medical Group, Jillian Santa Maria from Barry Dunn, and Muhammad Khan from Bangor Savings Bank. Would like to say if anyone's organizations out there today would have any interest in learning more about joining the Stay Work Play Board of Advisors to help your organization kind of stay at the forefront of being an employer of choice in New Hampshire, feel free to send me a comment in the chat or send me an email at will@stayworkplay.org. Also, speaking of employers of choice, would certainly want to encourage all of you out there to consider nominating your organizations or others that you admire here in the state for the Cool Company of the Year Award that is given out as part of Stay Work Play's Rising Stars Awards, which is kind of our big signature annual event coming up in October. You can learn more about the Cool Company of the Year Award and what that's all about, as well as the nomination process at stayworkplay.org/Rising Stars Awards. And the link is also going to be shared in the comments in the chat there. Would also say, and Pubali kind of hinted at this, didn't hint at it, said it outright, that you know, she'll be coming back and joining us next week for another webinar. So if you like today's, you'll definitely want to register for the webinar next week. And it's entitled, They Said Yes, Employer Orienting and Onboarding. So it's going to be another great drop of knowledge for us all, another great conversation. And a link for that webinar I know was shared in the comments a little while ago. So please feel free to register, share with anyone else you think might have an interest.